So today we are talking about storytelling. So in the spirit of storytelling, I wanted to share just a little tidbit, a little personal story with you. Throughout COVID, throughout pandemic times of working, I was working remotely, as many of us were. But I live on a farm just outside of Kansas City. And when I say just outside, it's about an hour outside of Kansas City. So the only option for me for internet is satellite internet. So for those of you who don't know, this is actually a thing. Satellite internet is actually a thing. It is for people who live on dirt roads where fiber optic cables and such would have to stretch for miles and miles before reaching anyone or anything else other than some cows. So the information or video or audio, things on Zoom, whatever it is that we were doing for our work, that was traveling over the internet would have to make its way all the way up to space and all the way back down again before somebody else would hear what I was saying. That fact alone is pretty remarkable to me, but our bar is really high now for what we expect in terms of information coming to us in a very speedy way. We've become accustomed to information at our fingertips on our phones and in notifications and very quickly. So having satellite internet and having living out in a rural area is quite different than most of or all of my colleagues and people that I work with. So it seems a little bit like a throwback to dial-up or something. But we've just forgotten what that feels like. It's not nearly as bad as that was from what I remember. But so I would be on a Zoom meeting on a call and someone would say something and then I would start to respond. And by the time what I said traveled all the way up to space and all the way back, they would already start talking again. And then that means I would be interrupting them and everything would take longer and it was just a little bumpy. So my Midwest Center colleagues were quite patient with me, but that was not always the case where I had patience for that, either myself or others. So the bar is it's so high for us, both for things like that with internet, and we want it to be fast and we want it to be speedy, but also our attention spans to wait for whatever is going to happen next. We do not have the attention span for it. It is small and immediate and we aren't patient, whether we even realize it or not. We expect things kind of immediately and bite-sized and digestible because that's what we have now. We are lucky to have things coming to us in that way. Or at least it's mostly lucky. Sometimes we miss some things because of this dynamic that we've set up. But I do find personally that if you tell someone that you have bad internet, they don't even really know what you're talking about until they see your face frozen on a screen. And even then, they can't really understand that's not just something that will pass, but that's just like a state of existence for somebody who lives in the middle of nowhere. So throughout these pandemic times, we've probably all been on a Zoom call where the connection is bad for someone, or they accidentally mute themselves, or something just goes wrong technologically or unplanned for. And so mostly people are patient if it's just, kind of one time, but it doesn't send a great message. And if it happens repeatedly, then people, at best, they tune out. They start to tune out, or they may lose their attention, whether they realize that or not. And at that point, maybe you've lost them in what it is that you wanted to say. So I share all of this with you because just our attention span for things in general, when we're dealing with things out in the world day to day, is so small. And that's why it's so critical that we are intentional and think about what we're saying, not only about ourselves and our work, but our organizations. And so when we're talking about sharing stories and sharing information, maybe with people who care to listen, but maybe with some of those who don't know that they care yet, but the goal is to make them care, to make them come along. We need to remember that we need to find the most effective and efficient way to go about doing that. So when we begin to share stories, whether it be through data, which we've talked about in some of these series regarding storytelling in the past, and we'll mention it today, but maybe some other delivery mode, maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's just a conversation with a stakeholder or a potential stakeholder or a community member. We need to know that our audience is likely impatient or distracted, whether they, like I said, whether they realize it or not. So bringing them along needs to be as clear and as crisp as possible. So I share this with you for a couple of reasons. So like I just said, we know that in general, people's attention spans are limited. They may not have a lot of time to give to whatever it is you're trying to share, or it could be their perception of their allotted time, because we often operate in this mode of multitasking and moving on to the next thing before it's really time to move on to the next thing. I don't know about you, but right before the session today, I was finishing up something I wanted to share with you. I was adding something to my target list for later today. Just thinking about all the things I had to balance today, and had to stop and tell myself to really hone in and focus. And so that's just kind of a habit that we form. We also know when we're talking about sharing information and storytelling that knowing our audience is essential. This is an essential piece to it. So for example, you are my audience today, and we've spent time together on this navigation series. I expect that we're all on computers or phones, and we're on internet, or we have cellular, we have access to be here and participate today. Some may have faster internet than others, but we are all here present together. So possibly even with fancy little earbuds in, maybe from the luxury of our home, or maybe not so luxurious if you still have children screaming in the background or barking dogs or something like that. But we have the ability to participate in this together, and you're on technology to do so. So when I'm talking to you about internet, slow or otherwise, or I'm talking to you about Zoom meetings and things like that, I know that I can talk to you about that, and it's a relatable, relevant data point in terms of information and sharing that out and how we would do that, because we're all on these devices. But if I were to be standing in front of a group of people who that was not how their primary work was conducted, or they did not have access to these things, then my talking about that would not be something they could relate to or have experienced maybe in the same kind of way, or something that they even really care about, because it doesn't impact what they're doing. So understanding who your audience is really key. And these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and how you can think about those things as you are trying to create a relatable and an efficient and an effective storytelling practice for yourself. So I have some slides to share with you. So today, again, we're talking about storytelling and how this can enrich your organization's narrative, and we'll talk about what that means with data, or with data points, and what those options are. So it kind of seems like storytelling as a buzzword, storytelling is everywhere now. So if you are really starting to, or have for a long time, looked into ways to communicate data and other things about your organization, for a variety of reasons, you will notice that word storytelling really popping up a lot. We've talked about it here on Navigation Series several times, and it is something that we as an organization are very passionate about, and feel that it is a very effective way to reach audiences and really share important information. But the reason that it's everywhere, I would say, is because people are starting to understand, or have understood for a while, but it's really becoming a pressing issue, that we're competing for everybody's attention. So as I mentioned at the start, all of us, whether we realize it or not, are multitasking on some level in terms of our attention span for things. Our days are so full, the responsibilities and the stakes sometimes are so high that oftentimes we will get a notification on our phone for like a news headline, and that's as far as we get. We look at the notification, we look at the headline, and we're like, okay, I'll read that article later, and we never come back to it because we're busy, or we're just so used to being able to get little digestible, bite-sized pieces of information, and that feels like enough, and you can move on. So to offer more in-depth information, we really are competing for people's attention and competing for their time. And storytelling is a more compelling, hopefully, and a connected way to do that. So this is why this approach has become a popular thing to look into and try to utilize. Also, the more data that we have, the more importance people put on data, the more important it is to find an effective way to share that data out. So to provide someone with a really dense spreadsheet can be confusing. It's not very compelling. A lot of people will say, okay, so what? What is this telling me? What does it mean? Even just a report with a lot of narrative in it, a lot of text, people may not go through that. Just like the notifications we get for news updates and tweets and different things coming at us. Oftentimes we do not click through to read the linked article or anything like that in full. And so coming up with a way that you can share really important information to compel some sort of action or buy-in is important. The way that you do that, the way that you present that, if you can be intentional about that, then it should be, in theory, more effective. There's also an awareness of interconnectedness, and this means a couple of things to me personally. So interconnectedness of our data and our information that is out there, there's a growing awareness that if we know something about this over here, it helps us to know more about this over here. So understanding how we can connect the dots between all of the different data sources, all of the different information we have about our work and our organization. So there's that type of interconnectedness. But there's also a connectedness on a human level. So because we get so many things coming at us that are numbers and need to know information and executive summaries and things that you have to go through that can be at times, although very important, a little bit dry, and on the heels of being in lockdown for a pandemic and all of those things, there's a craving for a human element to understanding, what does this mean? Why is it purposeful? And what does it mean to us, really? And so we still need that data and that evidence to help drive the value of that and to have some sort of proof, if you will, of why it's important. But doing it on a connected human level is really what's going to draw out relatability and action from people. Also, it's scientifically proven, there's lots of research around, if you can share a story and someone has some context to understand the information and the data you're providing, how it applies to a real human being and what that person felt, they are far more likely to remember that, to attach to it, to engage with it, and then ultimately to take action from it in some way if they feel like they see themselves in something that you shared, or you provided some sort of human story that connected to the important data that you offered. So data, visuals, story in terms of standing up and speaking to a group of people, or just having a small conversation with people. These are all different methods and different modes of delivery, which we will talk about. Okay, so storytelling versus narrative, are these the same thing? Are they not? Yes and no. So story is often referred to as kind of a single unit, an individual event or experience. And the narrative is that larger kind of broad story about your organization or your work or you personally, however you're applying this approach. So you may develop some storytelling that is about that single experience, that single event, and then thinking about how, if you were to do that about several things that are going on in your work, in your organization, how do they thread together to provide a larger, overarching narrative of your organization, something that describes the essence of your organization. So the goal is to be effective in providing shorter little stories that describe events, programs, different things that have occurred within your organization, but with the mindset that all of those things threaded together is going to craft this larger narrative that really speaks to who you are on a bigger level. Storytelling is really more that practice, that delivery method of relaying each of those stories and building that narrative process. So again, this could come in the form of standing up and providing a presentation, maybe with or without some visuals. It could just be a report or some sort of infographic or handout that you hand to people. It could come in the form of a little video where you're putting together little interview snippets and different information. So it just depends on the platform you're given and the information you're trying to share and what's the most effective way to get that information out there. Narrative as a word technically is a research methodology. So it is an actual qualitative research approach with all different kinds of very specific steps that you can take. So this would be referring to something that really is talking about that broader, more long-term, kind of all-encompassing. If it were about a life, it would be more in a memoiristic kind of space, but from a research lens, or it could be about the organization. So in general, this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about stories, storytelling, and narratives. So this is as clear and simple as it is to craft a story. It's kind of all over the place, and that's really how it needs to be, because you're going to circle back to a lot of these things. So you'll have these slides available to you to reference some of these prompts and some of these different points. But essentially, the idea here is that you're going to start somewhere, you're going to do a few other things, you're going to come back to what you start with and go through some of those other things again. And it's not a specific path for everyone who's going to utilize this approach. There's no wrong way to do it. There are some best practices, but there's really no wrong way to do it. If you are sharing information and you're providing important information and some sort of human relatable connection, you're on the right path. But these are just helpful points along the way to be able to start to shape that a little bit more. So, excuse me. So we'll talk about these things on the slide. I would encourage you to kind of go back if you are interested in working through the process of crafting a story, but we're going to talk about each of these things in the next couple of slides. So this will be in the slides. It's also a separate PDF that I can share with you all. But basically, it's a little bit of a roadmap in terms of, okay, I have this program, this event, or maybe just kind of an overarching story, something that I want to relate or relay to people about what the work is that we're doing. So the place to start always seems like something that's like, I don't need to do that. We know what we're doing. But if you start with your mission, your vision, your core values, every time, even though it may seem redundant, it can be very brief. But to revisit that and even just say it to yourself of, okay, what do we really do? What are we really about? What is our ultimate goal, our mission, our vision? This is essential because it's going to put you in the right mindset for, why did I do the thing that I just did that I want to talk about? And what do I really want people to connect back to? Then you're going to ask yourself why you do what you do on a day-to-day. So a little bit more specifically in terms of your offerings, the work that you're doing in the community, and think about why you do that. How does that more specifically connect to that mission or vision or core values that you have established for your own work and for your organization? So this is very high level in terms of getting in the right headspace so that you can really provide a basis for answering the following questions. So here this is very text dense. So again, you have access to this, and I'll just pull out some highlights for you, but I've provided this for you so that you do have those questions and those prompts if you want to take the time to kind of work through this outline or this process. I find it to be helpful. Take from it what's useful to you. But you're going to think about, and maybe you already have one in mind, but an example of an experience, an event, a program, something like that, that you need to share out about with some group of stakeholders or community members. You want to think about, how did that feel and how did that embody what we just revisited in terms of our mission, our vision, our core values? And then answer some questions about that experience. So what prompted you to choose that particular thing to share out about? There's most likely some reason, whether it be that it was really important or that it's really key in bringing understanding and awareness to something in particular. So answering some of those questions, again, they may seem like, oh yeah, I know that, but to really spend time with those and distill down to those core essence of why you did it is going to help you tap into that human connection and that really purposeful driven space that most likely made it a successful thing that needs to be reported out on. So once you think about that, you're going to think about, what did you learn from the experience? What are important data points that need to be shared? What came from it? Who was involved? Who did it impact? Once you have all of that information, you're going to have far more information, most likely, than you really need to share out about. So it's going to be important, and we'll talk about this, about making some really intentional choices. So when you start to begin the story building process, so you've done all this work to think through, what are we about? What did we do? What is this thing we need to share out on? Follow some of those prompts, and you've kind of got your data points. You know, I want to tell them this. I think it's important we include this data point. This might be relevant. You have kind of gathered all of that information. You've gotten yourself into a headspace in terms of what's important to connect with people on and what you really want them to know. If they were to ask you the perfect question in your mind of, what's your organization about? What's your work about? What do you do well? How do you help? All these questions, if they could ask you the perfect question, what would it be? And then answer that through what you have to share with them. So building themes is part of kind of that process. So this is all of these things, it's up to you, take from it what is most useful, but theme development I find to be extremely useful. So you can think of themes as if you have a box full of old photos and you are wanting to organize them by year or family members or however you want to organize those things. So you're going to sift through your information as you would sift through a box of family photos, and you're going to make stacks or metaphorical stacks of this information kind of belongs over here and speaks to this theme. This information is kind of over here and talks about this other thing. And then think about how they're related and how you might organize those. If you were to put those photos on a page, in a book, in a video for family, in what order would they go and why? And it's the same kind of mindset and process when you're thinking about organizing that information to share out. So usually there's going to be some keywords that you already have in your mind. Use those, but try to also then get those out of the way and then think through the experience that you're trying to share out on and think of it as objectively as you possibly can and think, are there any other kind of themes that are coming up or keywords that I would use to describe this experience, and see where that leads you. It may lead you to different highlights of it that you can share. So some questions to ask when you're going through this process of actually developing what it is I'm going to share out is, from this experience, this event, this program, whatever it is, how have things changed? How have they changed for you personally might be a good place to start. You may not share that out, or it may be the story that you lead with. How has it changed for other people? Maybe something has changed for a community member. That's an impactful story that you can share. And then you can provide some other data or facts to back up why the reason that person's feeling that way actually happened. And we see that in the numbers that you have, indicating that it's probably relatable for others as well. For you personally, or for other stakeholders that were a part of it, you can ask, what was most inspiring or surprising? Maybe you went into the situation thinking one thing and got something quite different out of it. And that in and of itself may be a good example of where you were starting, but where you ended up. What was discovered? What's life like now versus then kind of question. And then again, some examples of impact and why it all matters. You really want to, as that squiggly, that slide with the squiggles and all the different things to address in this process, this is where it shows that you're really going to go back to that purpose and that why at the beginning when you're thinking about your mission and your vision, and remember, why does this matter? Why are we doing this? So more circling back, but also this time it's really thinking back to the actual technical delivery of sharing out a story. So as I shared with you at the beginning, knowing your audience and knowing that pretty much anybody that you're talking to is going to have a limited amount of time, potentially a limited amount of interest, depending on who the stakeholders are. And the idea is to grow their interest, grow their knowledge, their buy-in, and bring them along in some capacity. Either if it's just to understand better, or maybe it's for participation or for fundraising, whatever the reason may be, you're wanting to bring them along. So ask yourself, when I started talking at the beginning, and then I said all the things I said in the middle, or I showed the slides I showed in the middle, when I get to the end, are we remembering why we did this in the first place? Circle back to that beginning and make sure that you're connecting the dots for them. So be sure that whatever point that you're offering, whatever data point, whatever story, that it has some sort of nice closure to it, where people think, I don't understand why she told me this one thing. Make sure that doesn't happen. You want to tie it up for them so they understand, oh, she told me this thing at the beginning. I understand how the story and the human connection and the supportive data that I have, all those things work together to really build it up, hold it up, and provide a really strong and compelling story for what's going on. Then technically think about your format. So again, back to the audience component. So you want to make sure that the timing is right for it. If you have a whole bunch of slides you could present, but the better format is to speak from the heart, or have someone who firsthand experienced whatever it is you're talking about speak from the heart. And then maybe a handout or a slide or two with some data to speak to those stakeholders in the audience that really need those facts and figures. Think about what combination is going to be especially effective and how much time you have. Because again, you're going to have all of this information, and then the idea is to sift through that, really narrow it down, distill it to its most essential points. So you're going to curate all of this and make sure that you're saying what you need to say, but not more than what you really need to say. Are we there yet? It seems like quite a process. This becomes a very efficient process that you can turn into a practice in how you're thinking about the stories you're telling to craft that broader and that larger narrative for your organization. So as each thing comes up that you think is important to share out, or somebody has asked you to share out about, think about what's the perspective that I can add to this that helps contribute to that personality of our work, that persona of our organization that you really want to continue to grow and make sure people understand about, so that when they think about your work, they can connect to it. And one of those stories or many of those stories are going to stick with them. Maybe not all of them, but there will be some that stick out for some more than others. So when you're thinking about that technical delivery of things, I really like this quote here where it says, if I am to speak 10 minutes, I need a week for preparation. If 15 minutes, 3 days. In half an hour, 2 days. If in an hour, I'm ready now. Meaning that to sift through all that information and really curate it and distill it down to the essential facts and make sure there's a human, relatable quality to it, especially given the type of work that we all do, that's going to take some time and effort. It's far easier to have, if you think about the example of somebody asking you to really share out about your life, if they gave you 10 to 20 slides, you could probably do that with a whole bunch of family photos and a timeline of your professional journey and all of these things. But if they said, can you do it in one slide and talk about your life and provide a narrative of your life in this very short space of time, it would take more preparation. You would really have to do some curation and think about, how can I get to the most important points in the space of time and visual that I've been given? So that is about being efficient and effective and speaking to that attention span that people have and just want that information. Visually, if you are offering something visual, this is from Stephanie Evergreen, who has a book and a wonderful blog about conveying information visually. But she says, if you have something visual, you want the so what of this information at the top, visual evidence below, and that is it. Do not overcomplicate things. Really curate that information down to your audience specifically and what's important. This is the same philosophy for doing this verbally. If you were to stand up and present, is to think about, what is the overarching, again, purpose? How does this hold up what it is we do and who we are? What do they essentially need to know that's going to reinforce that? And what's most important to share? And then share that in the best possible delivery method. So some more questions there for you to help you along in that process. So that's all I have for my slides for you today. I do want to do just a couple of little things to offer to you as some more tools. So I'm going to provide a poll for you, but before I do that, I just want to share one quick thing with you. A good starting point for getting started with this storytelling development and really crafting an overarching narrative is to think on a personal level. Our work for so much of us is very personal. And if you can think about yourself and your own work first a little bit, it will position you to think about the organizational work in a similar kind of way. So a good way to dig into this process and approach just from a practice sort of standpoint, but I also find it to be beneficial for other areas of your life, is to think about why you began your career in the first place. Think about what you're doing. Why nonprofits? Was that purposeful? Did you arrive where you're at kind of by accident or unintentionally? And how does that feel? Does it fit your path? Does it fit you? What's your why? And if you were to think about what's kind of my mission or reason for doing this, why am I in this season of my life right now doing this particular work? If you can work through that process for yourself as an individual, then you'll come to the storytelling process, not so much from a, oh my gosh, we have so much data and I don't know how to distill this and I don't know what we should be talking about. It's so much, I don't know how to sift through it and what's the most effective way to do it. But if you can tap into that human relatability, core inner why for yourself related to your work, and then go from there after you've had that practice, then going through it for a larger situation or a higher stakes situation for your organization is going to be a little easier. You'll have already put yourself in that mindset and had some of that practice. So it's a good way to begin that inquiry process around purpose and developing a storytelling voice and mindset as you start to do this for your organization. Okay, so we have just a little time left, and I want to put a poll up for you all, and then we can chat about that. So asking you, do you feel your organization already uses storytelling as an approach? And it looks like mostly people are saying somewhat, but need to develop it just a little bit more. So hopefully some of the tools today will help you with that. This is, I will say, you're asking for examples, and I completely understand that. This is definitely an overarching kind of, here's what storytelling process can look like, but there are more in-depth tools. So I did ask if that would be something that you would be interested in. Most people said yes, so that is certainly something that we can provide. And that one, it was divided into 2 slides today. You'll have the slides. I can also provide just the single PDF for that map of question prompts to walk through so that you can have just that apart from the presentation slides and use that as a tool. It's not perfect. It won't work perfectly like that for everybody. As you recall the slide with the squiggles all over it, just use it how it best works for you. But there are things that are a little bit more specific to help you technically craft that. So those are great questions on that to get started with. And that may be enough, but you may need a little bit more, yes, detailed kind of specific actions to take. The only thing I would caution you with as far as that goes is the more specific you get, the further away from the human element you get. And the most important thing that you can keep in your mind is people will relate to what you're telling them if it has some sort of humanity quality to it, which all of our work does. Some of the things we have to share out are maybe don't have that as much as others. But ultimately, if you're circling back to that mission and vision, your core values and your why for the work, even if you can just thread in a small example, a small story, something like that about the data point you're sharing out on and its impact, that will help get you there. So it's good to start a little bit more broad, because you may have ideas that if you go too specific in those checkpoints or those action steps, you may not think about, because you may narrow in too quickly into the details of how do I execute this. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are all short of time. We are all multitasking all the time. And so it's hard to not want to immediately go to, okay, how do we do this? We need to execute. We need to get this out. But if you can allow yourself just a little bit of space to think, a little bit bird's eye view, and get back to that kind of core sensibility of why you're doing it. Start to develop that voice. That will come more efficiently and faster as you're looking at the data. It'll be a go-to for you where you're like, what does this mean exactly? So I'm going to end the poll for us here. And I'll share those results with you. So again, a lot of people saying they're somewhat using the storytelling approach. They need to develop it a little bit more. Definitely interested in some more tools which we can help with. And then can you think of an example of something that you'd like to craft a story about now? About half and half, and that's fine. There may be something that's pressing on your mind that you've been asked to share out about, or you really feel excited to share out about in your work. It may be something you need to sit and process a little bit as well. So I'm going to stop that poll there, and then let's talk a little bit. So the specific tools, yes, the specific tools would be great. I'm looking over here at the chat. And yes, I can, there's a few people asking about walking through this process a little more specifically. So we do have some things coming up at the Midwest Center in the future where this will be more of a kind of class environment where we can have a group of people, maybe even face-to-face or hybrid, and we can walk through these things together. So that'll be a future option. Always happy to talk with people too, because I know it's very unique and specific to each individual. I would still encourage everyone to start at that personal level, because I think that that will really help you to be more efficient and even faster in the process as then you're doing it for your organization. Just like telling a story where it is more effective if it has that relatable human element to it. If you yourself can get to that human why element for yourself first, and when you launch into going through this process for the work, that's going to be in the back of your mind, and it's going to help shape that voice, because it really is about developing an efficient and effective, but still connected, that connecting the dots between the data points and the information and the human elements of why you're doing it and its impact, and getting that out in the best possible way for whatever platform you're being provided. Like I said, whether it's standing up and presenting to a group of stakeholders with or without visuals, maybe you're limited to just providing a report. If that is the case, we've talked in other navigation series, and this is something we could talk more specifically about in the future in a variety of ways also. But there are available tools to you to create something that is a visualization or an infographic that doesn't have to be as fancy as some of the things you see, and maybe can help you tie those human qualities back to it. So we can develop some tools or talk about that more in future sessions. So there's a question: we are launching a new program, and as you said, we are all busy. Do you think we can contract out some of this content if they are not intimately involved in it? So Amy, do you want to talk to me, talk to the group a little bit more about your situation?
Sure, I can do that. So we're launching a new program, and there's just so much to do, as you have said. We need a lot of content. We have a newsletter. We're going to be opening like a group chat type of thing. I don't know, a forum, a blog, interactive, all that. There just doesn't seem to be time to put out to create this content. And I have a proposal going to management about hiring someone to get some of that initial content written. But as I listen to you, I'm a little worried that it won't have that human touch maybe that we're needing. And I don't want it to come off insincere or fake. And even as I'm saying it out loud, I'm sitting here thinking, I've got to make time to write this myself somehow, but I wouldn't say that writing is my strongest point.
So here's what I would say, though. I would say, so writing is one way to go about it, but there are other tools, and I'm happy to provide them, that are far less heavy, especially time consuming on the like writing something out. Even if you're going to ultimately end up in providing it in like a written report, that part will go much faster if you can just grab together some words, some data points, and get yourself just kind of in a mindset and almost sketch it out. I don't think it has to be super organized in how you do it. It's kind of the metaphor of like someone's really messy desk, but it's organized to you. It doesn't matter what it looks like.
Desk right now.
It's my life. So you don't have to have it in this like perfect way. Like I said earlier, there's no wrong answer to going about this, as long as what you arrive at is it has something in it that people, hopefully the majority of your audience, can kind of relate to. It taps into like a human emotion of like, oh yeah, like we're reminding people like really why we do this work. And also, here's the really important data you need to know, even if that feels a little drier, and sometimes it will and sometimes it won't, but it's still important. So we're not talking about, writing a memoir every time you have to, share out a story. The story can, ideally actually just be maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes of, if you were to speak to it. Maybe 1 or 2 slides in a presentation would be ideal. So there's some ways to really, as I said, distill and curate that down. The first couple times you do it, it just will be a little more time consuming until that like process becomes a practice. So, but there are other tools to kind of help you drill down, and I'm happy to share things about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay, so maybe create bullet points of key concepts that are meaningful, and a storyteller could work with that. That's a great suggestion. Yeah. So we have just about 5 more minutes. What other questions does anyone have? Comments, disagreements with what I say?
Monica, I would love to hear one of these in action, like a model, like for you to tell a story, like you told us about how to tell a story. I'd love to hear a story. And I don't know if there would be an example of a nonprofit that you've worked with that would come and share their story with us in this format.
I think that would be great. And actually, I really love that you set me up for a wonderful advertisement for that. So I have partnered with the Family Conservancy, and we are building out a dashboard, a data dashboard for them to really tell the story, both to stakeholders, but to community members in general, about the work that they're doing. Now, that version of storytelling is really going to be curating some data for them, and not so much like a spoken element to it, with the exception of when it's introduced or when it's used. It will be there, and someone will be facilitating the navigation of it and pointing out key concepts and things like that. So when we talk about storytelling, it can be very data heavy. It can be graphs and visuals, as we've talked about in past series. But it can be really standing up and telling a personal testimony of something that has occurred. So that would be one example from a data perspective. And that's something that in the future, that individual I've been working with and myself will be having a conversation about that I'll provide to you in some format so you can see that. But knowing that suggestion, I think some other examples, and also some more storytelling kind of examples from myself of how I would go about different things, or how I have with other organizations, would be something that we can pull together so that you have it as something to look at and refer to. Does that help, Will?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Does anyone
Yeah,
here
okay.
does anyone here work for, this is Maka, by the way. My video is off because my living room is a mess. But does anyone here work for the YWCA? I'm asking because when Will asked about, we've been talking about storytelling, and the YWCA in my city does this, also please excuse the construction noise in the background. It's delightful being woken up by that at 8 in the morning. But the YWCA in my city has this annual 1 hour power fundraising lunch. And the thing, they are usually able to raise like $500,000 in that 1 hour because
Amazing.
it's honestly, I'm like, do you guys want to fundraise for my life or for student loans? It's honestly super impressive because what they do is, their narrative is about improving the lives of women and children. That's their overarching narrative. Now, the stories that they tell, they will pick specific women that they've helped and make like a 1 to 3 minute video. And when I tell you it will melt any cold, cynical person's heart, it's like, here, take all of my money, because it's not even cheesy or sappy, or these are stories of resilience, right? They'll be like, so this is a woman who came in, this is how we helped her. She had no resources. She was living in an abusive relationship. And this is how she built herself up with a little bit of assistance. And it's a very short video that just tells you the who, the what, the why. And by the end of it, the room is like sniffling in tears and all of the wallets are empty. So to me, that's an example of story versus narrative and how to use that well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So YWCA, where are you at?
I'm in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay. I would love to connect with you and with them, and we could put together some examples if they would be willing to do that. There's a few others locally here too that come to mind that we could do that to provide some examples. Perhaps we need a story slam of some kind that would help develop that storytelling situation. But yeah, there's lots of ways to go about it. It really is going to be specific to your audience and the platform that you're given. And so that may be a perfect example for many people. You may not have the ability to stand up in front of people or to provide a video. Maybe you're being requested to provide the information in a particular way. So it's getting creative about how you make something like a report on a page connect to heartstrings and things like that, which sometimes can be more challenging. So there's lots of different ways, and sometimes you have some parameters to stay within and using that tool to help get you there. But I love that example. And I love video. There's a research approach called video ethnography, and it's fantastic. So also something to flag for a future discussion. Thank you for sharing that. But we are at time. I will stick around for a little bit here if anybody has any further questions, and we will provide those resources to you as well. But thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it.
Monica, somebody just threw a question up about the role or the relationship of the infographic to what you're talking about. I don't know if you want to try to hit that real fast as people are signing off, or maybe
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so infographics are a great way if you are needing to reach someone by just sending or providing like a quick, easy PDF, or you want to include it in a presentation that you're going to be speaking at as well. An infographic is something that people can visually digest a lot easier than too much text. It's limited in the number of like graphs and charts, which takes a little bit more mental processing. So it's trying to make the information as approachable and digestible in a short frame of time as possible. It's also a little bit more of a creative outlet for it. So if you're trying to, make it a little bit more creative and interesting to look at than just dense text, that's a way to go about it. And there are tools like Canva is a tool. There are others that you can have a free version or a paid version. So that kind of walk you through it. You don't have to be an expert in like Adobe Illustrator to do these things. So these are not out of reach to people. You don't have to have a graphic design background to do some of these things. So some of those tools, they are out there, they're available to you. Those are other resources we can list for you. All right, I'm here for a little bit. But thank you everyone. I hope you have a wonderful week.